Today's video, we're going to be feeding all of my fish, and that includes my 11 aquariums down here in my basement, my new aquarium up in my office, as well as my koi pond outside. I'm going to be showing updates to all my tanks, talking about the fish, what I feed them, how often. So let's dive right in. Here's my 180-gallon aquarium that has South American cichlids, some pretty big guys with an Oscar, some Severum, some Walrus, and a few others. But for most of my aquariums, I do feed extreme brands when it comes to dry food. So for this tank, I do a lot of monster pellets, especially for the Oscar, and the big fella pellets from Extreme are slightly smaller pellets, so all of these fish will get them. This is the krill flake, which I love, but also the spirulina flakes is great. And you'll see that these guys are very eager for food, especially the Oscar. The two Geophagus tapajos and the pleco are no longer in here because they have been moved, so we will show that in a little bit. But just going to drop in some food. The Oscar just goes crazy. He gets huge mouthfuls of the big pellets. The Severums and the Walrus, they eat anything from the pellets to the flakes. And then any small scraps, for instance, if the Oscar spits some out, the bala shark will go around cleaning up all the little pieces. So really fun tank to watch, and these guys are really big and getting bigger, and they're going to get a big upgrade. Geophagus finni is always sifting the sand. I love Geophagus because they clean up the sand for you and are constantly scouring for any uneaten food. This is my 150-gallon aquarium, and you might notice a few changes here, but we're going to go into depth on all those in a subsequent video. But I have Geophagus finni, electric blue acara, an albino hecali, and a couple angelfish, as well as my school of denizen barbs here, and there are a couple plecos in here as well that help with some of the algae. But I usually give this tank big fella pellets. It's the right size for them. They go crazy for it, and even though they're kind of shy right now because I brought up the camera, they should come out right here when I start feeding the tank. Even though the pellets sink down to the ground, I'm totally cool with it because they all eat off the sand. The Geophagus love scouring that sand, like I said. Yeah, awesome tank that has just been thriving. I've really enjoyed this aquarium. And although the last two tanks are always fun to feed, I don't think any of my aquariums hold up to the African cichlids. So let's go there next. African cichlid tank with peacocks and haps. Peacocks and haps prefer a more protein-based diet, so I don't really give them spirulina, mostly krill flake or the pellets from Extreme. I actually just added 3 new peacocks, the German reds. You'll kind of see there, they all obviously look alike. Going crazy. They finish off these pellets food so quickly. And one thing I always try to preach on the channel is not to overfeed your fish. You might notice that this is not a ton of food, and really cichlids do not need as much as you might think. They survive in the wild sometimes for long periods without food. It is usually a healthy sign if they seem hungry. Unless you have fry or baby fish that might need 2 or 3 meals a day at lower volumes, I would just stick to once per day. That's what I do and what I recommend, and that way you're not overfeeding your tank and just polluting the water and adding nitrates into the equations. But overall, this tank has been doing great. These guys are so fun to watch. Definitely my favorite tank to feed, and just watch them go berserk. Okay, so we just got done feeding the African cichlids, which might be my favorite tank to feed. This tank here is my 90-gallon discus aquarium, and it might be my least favorite to feed because the discus are kind of picky eaters. I've always had issues with a couple of them not eating a ton, even though I've done a lot of rounds of medication. My go-to is krill flake and some smaller pellets, some nano-sized pellets. But I usually just drop in some food in a slit on the back of the tank because that way I don't have to open the canopy or disturb them that way. You can just see the rummy nose tetras going nuts, which is really fun to see. And then some of the zebra loaches are going to come out and start to get some food too. And then some of my corydoras, I have 6 of them in here. They will come out of the rocks as well. Okay, and now probably the most anticipated tank that you guys wanted to see is an update on the 500-gallon plywood aquarium. You'll probably see some extra fish swimming around in here because I did have the electric Lucara originally in here. They're still doing great, the 3 of them. But now I have the 2 Geophagus topos in here as well. So I moved them from the 180 since they were the smallest cichlids, and I kind of wanted them to start getting things moving in the aquarium, sifting the sand, and also kind of feel at home before some of the big boys go in here. And then there's also my green phantom pleco. So I went ahead and moved those 3 in here. There's 6 total fish, but they're going to be joined by some big South American cichlids from my 180, as well as a stingray and maybe 1 or 2 other fish that I'm planning on putting in here. I just drop in some cichlid peely pellets, since these guys are relatively small, and you'll see them go nuts for it. Yeah, these guys are doing phenomenal in this massive tank. I'm sure they're enjoying the 500 gallons just to themselves, but so much more to come on a big update for this tank. But seeing these Geophagus in here and the pleco, if I can find them, is just kind of a sneak peek into what's going to be happening in the big transfer video coming up very soon on the channel. Next up is my 15-gallon Hello Reef aquarium kit, which is a 15-gallon saltwater tank with 2 clownfish and a really big Chicago sunburst anemone. And this anemone has really grown. It looks like it's about to split into 2 and multiply, which would be really cool. So mostly I give it the bulk resupply pellet food that came with the kit, and you'll see as some of those pellets fall into the anemone, it will collapse upon itself as it starts to eat. And then once it's done, it will expand back and it will look amazing with some awesome color and movement as it sways in the water. I also have an aquarium upstairs in my actual office that is a freshwater desktop tank that we will see shortly with another sneak peek of a new fish. We also have my fish room to get to, but before we do that, let's go out to my koi pond and feed the koi. So this is my 1,500-gallon koi pond in my backyard. I had 6 koi in here. I had 5 originally. They had a baby last year, which was a surprise. It's already caught up to the others in size, and I usually feed these guys some pellet foods from the pond digger. He actually sent me this a couple years ago, and so I've continued to feed them. I usually only feed them maybe once every 2 days, and they do just fine. But yeah, the pond itself has looked better. You can see it's pretty cloudy because there is a hole somewhere in the waterfall, so I do need to fix that, silicone it, and once that waterfall is fixed, hopefully everything looks much better in this koi pond. So next up we have my fish room with a 75-gallon tank on the left and my 2 20-gallons on the right. The left tank has electric Lucara that are growing out and will be going into a different tank here in a little bit. I have a plan for them, and then I also have the 2 Cuban cichlids, which will be a pair that will move into the 75-gallon tank very soon. And the Cuban cichlids do hide out a lot, but I usually give them some big fellow pellets from Extreme, and usually they will come out if I stand kind of further away. So the Cuban cichlids are going to look so much better and be so much more comfortable once they're in the 75-gallon tank. But for now, I've had these electric Lucara, which I also feed mostly pellet food, sometimes the krill or spirulina flake as well. And this is another fun tank to feed because the electric Lucara just go crazy for food. Shell dweller tank, and you can see there's so many babies and different generations of shell dwellers in here. It seems overcrowded, but they did it to themselves by breeding so much. It's really easy. Look at them coming up for food. I just drop in a pretty decent amount of krill flake or spirulina flake, usually krill flake since they like a more protein-based diet, but they go crazy for it. All the babies start coming out. It's a very fun tank to watch feed. It's not a fun tank to observe because they destroy any type of aquascape, and there's also some cyanobacteria in here, but always fun to feed. Here is my cold water cichlid tank. These are Gymnogeophagus terrapurpura, so there's no heater here and the fish do really well. I have a couple panda cories and tetras in here as well, so I usually give some pretty small flakes, usually the krill flakes, and they go crazy for it again. Sometimes the spirulina, but usually a small pellet or flake food like krill.
So this is my 5-gallon smart aquarium that I did a full video on last week, and I have a new inhabitant in here. It's my awesome new beta, which we named Giannis since we got it from a fish store in Milwaukee. He is currently solo in this tank until I add a few small tank mates with him and some more live plants. But it's really simple. I just feed him some crushed up krill flake or some nano pellets, and just a little bit because one little fish doesn't need a whole lot of food.
So all of my fish have been fed, and a lot of those updates that we hinted at throughout the video will be their own videos, including the big update on the plywood tank and the stocking of that. So definitely subscribe down below if you haven't already. Thanks again for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.